I think we can take this to the particular subject matter that we're following with, which is that of EU enlargement and integration, which is often also viewed as a very cold topic of discussion with very little space for emotion and empathy. And in fact, it is a topic that should be filled with that, especially because enlarging Europe often to places that have or that are experiencing conflict really speaks to these very emotions. I believe I was asked to moderate this panel because a bit more than a year ago, I was one of the co-authors of a Franco-German paper on Europe's enlargement and integration. That paper was meant to sort of bring Europe to discuss its future and to try and set an agenda for this commission to enlarge and deepen Europe. And so I have a very formidable panel today to discuss where we stand on Europe's enlargement. A panel of women exclusively, who are mostly coming from the Western Balkans, but not only, and who have a very long-standing experience of these issues. And I think I'll start by giving the floor to President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, who was a former president from Croatia, who has led our country towards joining the EU and who works today still on these issues, including in a country like Ukraine. So I would love for you to open this discussion with your experience. That could be, I guess, a model or inspiring to countries that follow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and hello everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you here today to discuss, as a matter of fact, one of the most successful EU policies, and that is the policy of enlargement. And I will be speaking about enlargement or the consolidation of Europe, of the European Union, from the perspective of a country that has undergone a triple process of transition in contrast to countries who exceeded before us. So the process of transition, the pillars of the transition first were systemic, from an autocracy to a democracy. Second, it was economic transition from a centrally planned to a market economy. And the third process of transition was from war to peace, from a country that had been victim of aggression and occupation to a country that became an agent of peace and change, but who has gone through a very complex and difficult post-conflict reconciliation and rebuilding process. And that was all part of our EU and, of course, NATO accession process, as we pave that road or cross that road from a prospective member to candidate to full member of the European Union and NATO, and today being also part of Eurozone and Schengen. And I do believe that even though each country's path to the EU is unique, because each country experiences unique problems, challenges, and issues, nevertheless, Croatia's experience can serve very well most of the aspiring and candidate countries who are now at different levels of joining the European Union. So let me draw on our experience, and I'll focus, after these very inspiring remarks in the beginning, I'll be a little bit more specific in terms of focusing on 5 what I believe were the major lessons learned that can be very useful both for aspiring members and for the European Union. And the first point I want to make is that throughout the process so far, both of accession and the continuing process of enlargement, which has been had been stalled and then was given a new momentum by aggression against Ukraine, we have not fully used the power of Europeanization. And by that, I don't mean making these aspirant or candidate countries or their societies European. By that, I mean building resilient institutions and resilient societies who will be able to carry both the obligations and the privileges of membership. I think that we have not fully realized the transformative power of Europeanization. We often focus on the goal itself, so on the accession, whereas we should be focusing more on the journey and the fact that the process of accession provides an excellent blueprint for the reform, democratic reform, political, economic, judiciary, etc., of every single society. And the ultimate aim of the accession process should not be satisfying EU's criteria, but really providing for a better life in a better country for all of our citizens. And that was the guiding, the motivating idea that led Croatia forward. The second point that I want to make is that you have to make the EU accession process in your own country, but also in the European Union as well, an all-inclusive process. I know it sounds a little bit like a tourist resort, but by that I mean including all segments of society, of course, including the public. So what Croatia did is once we started negotiations, we decided that we are going to take the issues of European accession and everything, all the difficult reforms, and reforms are difficult because they often cause status quo and provoke dissatisfaction in different parts of society, etc. So we decided we were going to take that process out of the usual politicizing, politicking, bickering, and fighting, and build a united front in the whole country. So it wasn't just the government and the negotiating team that comprised about 1,500 members, which for the country size of Croatia is quite a big number. It wasn't just the government who were negotiating, it was also the parliamentary opposition. What we included in the process, all the trades unions, workers unions, syndicates, everybody, and had what it seems on the outside like a complex process, but it was a very quick one of the fact that in the process of not just creating negotiating positions for Croatia, but approving them, presenting them, we included the parliament, where a member of the opposition was the chair of the parliamentary committee who did the final revision of the negotiation positions, and they would be always published online for the public to be able to see. The third crucial element is precisely including the public and keeping citizens on board. You have to be open, you have to be transparent, you have to respect your citizens in order for them to respect you and what you're doing. So we had a number of activities that included the public, for instance, the National Forum, where we went around Croatia to speak about specific topics. And we would include a range of speakers from, Europhoric to Europhobic, a range of opinion. And when people were given a space for debate and to express their opinion, then you can remove some misconceptions or disinformation. And again, you can keep people on board because then they feel really included, that this is a common goal and a common process where everybody has a say. And the second aspect of keeping people on board is informing the public of the benefits, but also the challenges of membership, because everybody has to be able to prepare in order to fully profit or avoid some of the pitfalls or avoid dissatisfaction or not being able to actually use the country's membership of the EU to their full advantage. Another aspect, so the fourth aspect that is incredibly important, is using the funding and building the absorption capacity of the candidate country or the acceding country to support all the institutions for membership. People often have a misconception in candidate countries that it's about harmonization of legislation. It's just a tiny little part of the process. The point is to build stable, resilient institutions that are transparent, open, uncorrupt, and that are capable administratively to efficiently carry out the obligations from membership, but also using the funding, which can be a big stumbling block. People often look at the EU funding as one of the biggest benefits, but it turns out that a lot of countries are not able to put it to full use, and then a lot of that funding goes back to the EU, and it hasn't been used to support the process. And the fifth point, on Croatia's behalf, I can promise to all of the candidate and aspiring member countries, in particular in our neighborhood, which I don't like to call the Western Balkans because of the connotation of the word Balkans that suggests trouble, falling apart. So who would want Balkans in their own house? And I prefer to use the wider term Southeast Europe. But nevertheless, we do call it officially the Western Balkans. So not just the Western Balkans, but also Ukraine and other candidate countries. We are prepared to support them politically by continuing to argue for the process of enlargement as the necessary element for the EU to become a truly global factor in every sense that contributes to the growth, the strength, stability, and prosperity of the European Union and the wider neighborhood. We can offer technical assistance, and now in the case of Ukraine, for instance, very, very specific assistance in the areas that already through the Thessaloniki agenda have been agreed as additional criteria for membership, and that is resolving open issues and reconciliation, so that the path from war to peace, resolving all of these aspects. So Croatia has fresh experience. We're here. We will continue to argue for the continuation of the process, but we will also continue to argue for fulfilling the criteria for membership, because after all, that is for the benefit of the societies and the countries who aspire to be members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this background and history, and for some of these tips to acceding countries. I'll come back to you with a few questions, in particular on the specific step of joining the euro versus joining the EU for Croatia, and maybe, if you know, we don't want to call them the Western Balkans, on how sort of stability and political tensions in the region might play a role in the process. But we can discuss that later. I now want to give the floor to Tanja Miscevic, who is the Minister for European Integration of Serbia, and who is therefore sort of front and center in managing this process in Serbia. And maybe I'd start with this question, rebounding on what was said on the inclusive nature of the process. Do you see this process in Serbia being as inclusive as it should be, or as the experience of Croatia suggests it should be? And Serbia has been, I think, viewed by many in Europe as a country that has gone back and forth in its ambition towards joining. Do you now believe that there is the momentum, the commitment, and this shared willingness to join within a fairly tight schedule? Please.
So thank you very much. It is my privilege to be here. I'm following the debates and participating in the debate. Let's bring a little bit of emotion into enlargement process. Since the dawn of time, that means since the beginning of 2000, when the enthusiasm and energy for enlargement was much, much bigger than it used to be after the period of 2008 and forward. And only recently we have re-engaged into the discussion of what is going to happen with the enlargement as a policy. Unfortunately, not because of the merit-based approach, but because of the war. So it proved a very important thing for the enlargement policy. The important thing for the enlargement policy is that it's the political issue. It's connected with the geopolitics, but also with the political decisions of all member states. Now we are, as you suggested, entering so-called the new momentum, which has been opened, again, unfortunately, because of the war. And the name of the game is how to seize the momentum, both for the Western Balkans, We can agree, disagree, dislike, or like the name, but this is the name that the EU is using for 6 of us from the region, but also including Turkey, as well as the new Troika, new trio, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia. And many of others seized the momentum. But for 3 years now, my country did not find a way for unleash the negotiation process. And it is closely connected not with the merit-based approach, because in the meanwhile, we did a lot in terms of our internal reforms, as much as constitutional reforms, which are connected with the reform of judiciary and more independency in judiciary and more deep-rooted independent rule of law institutions, but because of the geopolitics, but because of the assessment that we are the only one or among those who did not introduce sanctions to Russian Federation, and full alignment in terms of the CFSP, CSDP is the most important political criteria now. But on the other hand, it will be also very important for all of you to notice that Serbia is the one that supporting Ukraine humanitarian-wise, but also in terms of the support of refugees. 80,000 refugees are in Serbia, and they are sheltered both in social terms and also in terms of education, even going education in Ukrainian language for the kids that are still with us. That Serbia is the only one from the region with the agreement on the European Defense Agency, that Serbia is participating in the most or the biggest number of EU-led missions, and that soon we are going also to participate in civilian-led missions, that according to the European Commission, Serbia is a very good example of not circumventing sanctions. So all of those elements are the part and parcel of the political assessment. How to seize the momentum is the main element, because the momentum should be grasped in order for the Serbia as society to return its trust towards the process of European integration. We were never, as the society, extremely enthusiastic to anything. So you cannot have 100% on anything in Serbia. And the biggest percentage in terms of the accession of Serbia to the European Union was back in 2010 to 2012, because the time of abolishing visa regime. So it was 74%. Average is 60 something. Now is around 50ish. Why? Because the process is very long. I've just hosted the Danish Minister for Europe, and she had a discussion with my students at the Faculty of Political Sciences. She discussed with 8 of them, and all 8 of them told her, we are not interested in European integration of Serbia or membership of Serbia to the European Union. And I tried to explain, look, you are talking with the guys that are 23, 24 years old. And we are promising them from the very beginning of their life that very soon we are going to become member of the European Union, and nothing happened. So, but let me finish on the very positive note. The element of how we can seize the momentum, and I've discussed with the North Macedonia Minister of Economy, is the growth plan, is something which is now in our hands as the reform agenda, a set of measures that we are going to fulfill as a token of credibility for us to speed up the process, but also the second part, which is the accelerated integration in some of the areas. So I would like to discuss a little bit further on this. If I would directly answer to your question on the inclusion and transparency since the very beginning, from the signing of the SAA, but also negotiating membership, we are very transparent in the process, but also in terms of the cooperation with the civil society organization. We have a platform in Serbia, which is known as the National Convention on European Union, more than 700 organizations, and they are following, discussing with us each and every document that we are preparing is a document for negotiation process. They are also giving us the strength. And I think if I may answer, if I may finish the first part of my discussion here today, I would use something which I find is very suitable for the enlargement process of the Western Balkan region. This is the quote that once been asked by a journalist, Jean Monnet answered. So on the question, are you optimist or pessimist in terms of the integration of the wider European integration of the European Union? He answered, I'm quoting him, he answered, I'm neither optimist or pessimist, I'm dedicated. So we are all very dedicated for becoming member of the European Union, as we do belong to the area, to the continent of Europe. We are sharing the same values, and we still have to work on many issues, but working on the issues cannot be the reason why not discussing further. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for this very candid intervention. And thank you for speaking also about the feeling about the youth in your country that may also be losing patience with a process that has dragged on for a long time. I'm going to give the floor now to Gordana Dimitrescu-Kočovska, who is the finance minister for the country of North Macedonia, and ask you the same question about the momentum and the window that has opened. And whether you think the Western Balkans are prepared to seize it. And maybe one more specific question to you, which is, how do you see this process taking place? Do you think each individual country will join on a pure merit-based, or do you think we will have what we have experienced in the past, which is kind of waves of integration, whereby a group of countries will join, and whether that means that the remaining Western Balkan country will join at the same time, and what does that mean of the interaction between their respective accession process?
Thank you very much.
Before giving you the floor, I'm reminding you all also that you have these earphones if you want to use them. I'm told it makes a huge difference, but you tell me.
Thank you very much. I'm for the first time here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for the possibility to speak on this table. Well, when we are discussing regarding our membership in European Union, we know that our future is only that, European Union and nothing else. In comparison with the Serbia, we can say that our young people are expecting as fast as possible to be part of European Union. So we are expecting to start as fast as possible the negotiation. But what is very important to say is that we have to finish also our homework, because all the countries has different, let's say, requests that they should overpass or based on the request that they should answer. It's not enough to say that we want to be part of European Union, but also it's very important to proceed, to implement, to realize. We are the new government, only 4 months. The election finished on May. The new government was adopted on 24th of June, which means that almost 4 months we are operating and working. working. And during this period, I can say that we noticed a lot of open issues that were created by the previous government, which meant that they were only saying we want to be part of European Union, but nothing was, let's say, finished. Two things are very important for our country. One is to finish the reform agenda for growth plan. That is very important, and this is the issue that was opened, and we need to close as fast as possible. And it was not even started by the previous government. And the second issue is connected with the Bulgarian issue. That is something that cannot be connected with merit-based system, and that we as a government are expecting this issue to be out of, let's say, these conditions for starting negotiation, and we are expecting to start the negotiations together with the other Western Balkan countries. When we're discussing regarding the reform agenda, I can say that we have 5 priorities. And when we start in the government, we decided that these are the priorities also in the government, not only like the priorities for the EU, but for the priorities in the country. The first is public administration reform and public finance management. When I entered in the Ministry of Finance, I noticed that a lot of things are not finished, although based on my experience from the private sector, because previously I was working in the private sector, it's something normal. But in the government or in the Ministry of Finance, it was not adopted, not used. So based on this, let's say, growth plan, we prepared immediately changes and we adopted in September. So only 2 months in which we prepare rebalance of the budget for 2025, and we try to change a lot of things that are connected with this growth plan. The second thing is, or the second priority is digital and energy or green transition. When we are discussing regarding this topic, I would like to add that this green transition is, let's say, wish for all the countries, but this depends also of the space in the budget. When we undertook the institutions, the realization of the budget deficit was 71%. The public debt was very huge. So the company for production of electricity that are mainly use lignite was completely destroyed. So you have to put also here priorities. What is the most important? Because I suppose that nobody wants country who will bankrupt to be part of European Union. So we decided first of all to consolidate our company for production of electricity, and after that to prepare this plan for green transition. And we are working up to now very well, and I am expecting until June next year to have better results in this field. Regarding the transition, the digitalization, I will share only one information, and you will understand how the previous government was interested regarding digitalization. In the tax office, that is the most important, I think, institution in every country, we have only 2 IT engineers, and this institution relies only on 2 IT engineers. That is, I can see, crazy and unacceptable for every government, because with 2 persons you cannot work, especially tax administration. So we are working a lot of changes here. Now we are in a procedure of preparing also e-invoice tender, which means that we want and we show that we will fight seriously with corruption and criminal, and we think that this is also very important for our EU membership. Also, the other field is human capital. We have a lot of people who are not employed, but in the same time they are using social care assistance, which means that they are healthy people. They need to pre-qualification in order to be ready for work. So we are focused also on that field. For the business environment, I can say that our country has more than 40% gray economy with this e-invoice and other changes that we are preparing, not only in tax office, in custom office, in other institutions. We are expecting that this percentage seriously to be decreased in the next period, because only we see that this is the only way not only to decrease the grey economy, but in the same time to increase the revenue in the budget. And the last one is rule of law, where also we are expecting a lot of changes, harmonization with EU law, and at the same time we are expecting a lot of changes in the sense of better work in public prosecutors, because at this moment we have ongoing several criminal cases for which our public prosecutors are saying that they are not still ready to finalize because they are connected with the financial criminal, and here we should invest a lot in order to learn how to work. So, as I mentioned from the beginning, it's not only to say that we want to be part of European Union, we should finish our homework. In that case, I can say also from the previous government that a lot of EU funds were returned. Why they were returned? Because they were not taking care of the realization of the big projects. And now we are in a situation where for 4 or 5 months we cannot proceed what was not proceeded during several years. And as I mentioned, we are focused on realizing the things, implementing the things, not only just here to say, because I think that we should show to the European countries that we really want to be part of this family. And at the end, what is, let's say, for me the most important, as I mentioned, EU is our future, which means if EU is stronger, we are stronger. Don't forget that small countries are following you. When you are stronger, you are motivating us to work harder and to be everything like to be together, all of us, like one big family. So be strong, work on collaboration, and in order the smaller countries to follow you. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I press you with one point? You've explained that each country has a different timeline and that negotiations have started at different moments. But do you still believe that at the end of the day, these countries will have to join the EU together, or do you think they will each join on their separate timeline?
I think that now it's time to stay together and together to be included in the European family. Why I think this? Because always I was asking myself why we are not keeping stronger between the countries. We need the countries in Europe to be stronger. We don't need the others, because we are here, we are working on the same, let's say, same land. We are very close, connected very well, and I believe that if we enter together, we will be stronger and we will have better future for all of us in Europe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, let me turn to Arantxa González-Laya, who is the Dean of the School of International Affairs at Sciences Po in Paris, but who also served as Foreign Affairs Minister in the previous Spanish government, and who has a long-standing experience of European issues. The question to you, and maybe goes back to this Franco-German report, which is that not only do member states who want to, or future member states who want to accede to the EU need to do their homework, as we have heard, but the EU itself needs to do its homework to be able to welcome new member states. And it felt that a year ago there was a general consensus in Europe that our current institutions were not fit for an enlarged EU. And an enlarged EU to large countries like Ukraine, but also an enlarged EU to a number of smaller countries like Southeast Europe. Where do you think this conversation is today? Do you have the impression that we've lost this commitment to deepen and reform the EU institutions before we do the enlargement? And maybe if you can give us an idea of the timeline, because in the report that we worked on, what we had said at the time that was that Europe should be enlargement ready by 2030. And that meant, the subtext of that meant, this mandate of the Commission had to basically undertake a treaty reform. And that doesn't seem to be anywhere near the political consensus anymore. I don't think this has made its way to the political guidelines of the Commission. And so, will Europe be enlargement ready?
Thank you very much. Let me make 3 points, and let me start with Disa, because I liked a lot how you got that started. This enlargement discussion is not just a bureaucratic exercise to get countries to align with the regulations, directives, and rules of the game of the EU. It's about the hopes, the expectations, and the fears of people. And if we treat it as a purely bureaucratic exercise, what we are doing is generating a lot of mistrust. And mistrust is exactly the opposite what you need to do if what you're trying is to enlarge the family. And let me say that there is a lot of mistrust at the moment, both on the current members of the European Union, who see this as a bit of a ghost, and there is a lot of mistrust on the countries that want to become members of the European Union, who see the European Union procrastinating and putting new obstacles on the way all the time. So my first point has to do with how do we treat this issue? And to me, especially what we are living in those last months, not just yesterday, but what we've been living in those last months, to me, enlargement is today a geopolitical necessity for Europe. Not just for the European Union, for Europe. And it's interesting that we are having this conversation as the European political community members are meeting in Budapest. Why is it a geopolitical necessity? Because the region is one of the world's geopolitical fault lines. There are other fault lines. In the South China Sea, there is a fault line in the Middle East, there is one in the Sahel, but there is one in the vicinity of the EU, and that fault line is about power relations, is about redrawing maps through power, is about the spheres of influence, is about the 20th century that we thought we had abandoned. So if this is a geopolitical necessity, then both sides need to take this as a geopolitical imperative too. And I'm saying this because this exercise will require a lot of political energy on both sides. On the EU, surely, but also on the countries who want to become members of the EU. And I like a lot what you said, Gordana, because you said what I think is a very difficult reality, which is that when you are in this gray zone of not being in and not being out, you're being played out. And it's not very comfortable to be in an area where you're being played out. And you think you may be playing others out, but the reality is that you're not. Because of your size. Mind you, we also have the same problem. So the first point I want to make is this is a geopolitical imperative today. So, Shaheen, to your question, it has to become the geopolitical priority of the EU too. One of these elements of the EU's strategic autonomy, strategic interdependence, whichever way we want to call it. Second point I would make is this exercise up until now has been about in or out, a very binary process. And maybe because of this geopolitical imperative, and maybe because, as Colinda said, this is not a short-term, it's a medium to long-term process. Maybe we have to also treat it as a gradual integration process. And if it is a gradual integration process, then we have to draw consequences from these gradual integration processes. What does it mean in terms of milestones, in policies, but what does it mean also in institutional belonging. How do you make sure that you are partially in also for the purposes of being in the institutions? There are very interesting ideas that a few colleagues of mine from the Institute Jacques Delors have put on the table on this idea of gradual integration, moving away from binary in or out, which maybe is useful to consider. And maybe it's useful for the EU that has the hard task of doing the institutional reforms. Maybe this is a way to prepare while doing it. The third point I want to make, and this has to do more to your question of how will we know if the EU is serious about this? In my view, the test will be the budget proposal that the Commission will put forward next year. And why is it? Because a budget will be the expression of whether we are in the gradualism or whether we are in the moment of structural change. And if we are at the moment of the structural change, a big way to demonstrate this is when you look at the budget, is how this budget will be allocated, how this budget will be conceptualized, including in the structure that the budget will have in the future compared to the structure that the budget has today. So I will be looking at the budget that, the proposal of the budget that the European Commission will put on the table as a market test of whether or not the EU is serious about enlargement, which I very much hope it will. And let me close by saying treaty change is a very difficult proposal. And we know that treaty change has sunk before, and it sank on little and smaller things than this one. So I want to put a word of caution about using treaty change as the test of our commitment to enlargement, because if we use that as the market test, maybe we are putting the bar a little bit too high. And also because I do think that even without treaty change, there are many things that can be done. Many things. As you very clearly pointed out in the Franco-German report, which was an excellent product that helps us understand where we can exploit the spaces that we have that we are not using today, even before we discuss treaty change. So here to, kind of feed the conversation.
Thank you very much. Maybe let me press you on one point. This whole process started again because of the geopolitical crisis and because of the perception that we needed to make a strong commitment to Ukraine in particular. Do you think that means that Ukraine accession must take place first before the others? And I'm thinking of Moldova or Western Balkan countries, or do you think this process started with a commitment to Ukraine, but it doesn't mean that Ukraine has to join first?
It's a tough question to answer, I have to say. And we went through this question when we had the previous enlargement, where we said it's tough to, in political terms, it's tough to say to some yes and to others no. We also know that we've got countries that have been waiting for a while, who have done their homework, whose citizens also expect that we move forward. Hence this idea then, rather than, I would put this together with the idea of gradualism. Because maybe if we do things gradually, we take away the pressure of all or nothing. So a good way to answer the question would be to say, okay, let's move with the parts that countries are ready, let's move them into those parts. Let's draw the necessary institutional conclusions and consequences from this gradual movement, and let's not wait until everything is perfect to put the ribbon on the parcel. Let me also say that Ukraine is a different case from all the others. And we have to be very vigilant that we send a very clear signal about how seriously we take the case of Ukraine, because that's in a way where we will put the bar of the commitment that the EU takes to making sure it's the rule of law and not the rule of the strongest. And there we have to be careful because this is a very important signal to our neighbor.
Okay, thank you. Tanya, I think you wanted to react to the point on gradualism, so please
Exactly.
go ahead.
So thank you very much for this opportunity, just to try to understand how do you perceive the gradual integration. Is this the integration which means to sign the agreement first on the accession and without the voting rights, and then gradually to acquire voting rights, fulfilling the criteria from the membership? If that is the case, I'm going to tell you immediately, strongly against that. Because in that case, we would be the second-rate members. But if you are thinking of the gradual integration as the accelerated integration from the growth plan and the new methodology, that means us to become part of some of the EU policies, like single European payment area, like the green lanes in terms of speeding up entrance into Schengen. Well, if that is the case, that is what we are doing with the growth plan, with the reform agenda. I also see a dear colleague from Albania. That is what we are doing, and for which we need your help. Because there is no need to change the treaty, the constitutional treaty of the European Union for this. There are needs and there are instruments to speed up the process. But how important that is, just for you to understand, our trucks, all of us come from the Western Balkans, are waiting per year, and there are 300,000 trucks entering and exiting from the region into the Schengen system. They are waiting, and you will not believe, 3,000 years per year. I cannot calculate how much money is lost like this, and how much, again, trust we are losing like this. If that is the gradual integration, then you have our all full support, and we can work together on this. Thank you.
Arantxa, do you want to react right away?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the beauty of where I am now is that I am talking for myself. I don't talk for anybody. I am an academic, and I observe. What I observe is that second-class citizen will not work. Okay? We've tried this before, it doesn't work. What I observe is that the in or out puts us and you at risk. And that therefore what matters and what would make sense is this sense that you be part of the spaces where, in a way, the work has been done, but drawing the necessary consequences of that from an institutional point of view in the EU. Okay? So it's, rather than waiting until everything is done and perfect, there is a gradual approximation in a way that has consequences for your participation and belonging into the European mechanism, processes, policies, and financing mechanism. That's, again, I don't speak for any EU member state any longer, but I thought I would put this on the table because in a way is a good way to encourage while providing security and keeping the incentive mechanisms in place, because we also have to keep the incentive mechanisms in place. If the incentives are not there, then enlargement will not happen.
Thank you. In keeping on the track of this discussion on gradualism, I'm reminded of the question I posed to you earlier, Colinda, which is, to some extent, and I was reminded of a conversation I had with a Latvian finance minister once, who told me being part of the EU is great, but actually we felt really part of the European family only when we became members of the euro. And I was wondering if you have a similar experience with Croatia, whether in fact, even once you're in the EU, you know, we're still in a gradual integration process to some extent, because there's still more phases, and the EU itself is continuing to integrate. So maybe if you can speak to that challenge of joining the euro after joining the EU.
It's becoming more and more difficult to speak against the music. However, for me, that feeling of really belonging and being a member state of the EU did not come with the Eurozone, but with Schengen, because I travel a lot. So it became so much simpler not having to go through passport control and switching terminals at airports, etc. But the integration into the Eurozone that comes after the membership, I think, does make sense. And some countries deliberately make a choice not to for their internal reasons, and then they keep the criteria actually at a level where they cannot join the Eurozone. I think for Croatia, it's been beneficial overall. The fact that it did provoke inflation was not the process of entering the Eurozone itself, but the fact that it was misused by parts of the commercial sector, and it wasn't handled exactly well, and it was very difficult to handle the process by the government of controlling if you have a full market economy and market freedoms. However, since Croatia still heavily depends on tourism, which we should switch to a lot more reliable parts of the economy, such as ITC, etc., because tourism has become volatile, especially with climate change. But now when I travel and when I go to countries that have not adopted the euro, even on business trips, it becomes very annoying not to be able to pay in the local currency, even when you want to use a public toilet. So it's just, it's very practical, and the fact that our economy had already been tied mostly to EU economies. But, speaking about phased integration or gradual integration, as Arantxa has called it, I'm all for individual merit-based approach to accession. And that actually allowed for Croatia to be able to accede to the European Union by not being made to wait either for Turkey, with whom we started negotiations, or with our neighboring countries. And I think that the merit-based process is really the process that motivates you most, because you depend on what you do, and you do not depend, you're not being stalled because of something that some other countries have not done, the criteria that they have not fulfilled. But also, the bigger the country, the more difficult it is to absorb. And I think this is going to be the issue for Ukraine, where people have already started to figure out the costs for those countries who will become net contributors, for those who will have to pay more into the budget, instead of doing the math of what is it going to cost us if Ukraine does not accede. So there, I can see a gradual phased approach. But with smaller countries, including Serbia, I'm sorry, I don't want to call you small, but when you compare the sizes of the economies and the number of people, I think that full accession is absolutely possible. And as rejoiced I was when Ukraine was given candidature status, nevertheless, I was very unhappy with the fact that Bosnia and Herzegovina was not, and they had made a lot of progress, and that our neighboring countries are not making appropriate formal steps on the way to the European Union in accordance with the reform processes and with the work that they have already carried out so far.
Thank you. That was very clear. I suggest we open to Q&A, and I will bring this back to the panel, of course. And I'll start with Maggie Fimo, who is a Deputy Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs from Albania, so we stay in the region. And then I will give the floor to Zoran Zolewski. And if you have questions, raise your hand, and I'll try to do it. So I suggest we collect a few and then give it back to the panel to conclude. Please.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope I'm being heard. A lot of important points were raised in this discussion, and I don't want to repeat, although I do agree on a lot of them, and I think the journey that we're going through is very similar. But I was really interested in your question, actually, because you mentioned whether the Western Balkans is ready to seize this opportunity. And I would actually flip that and say, are the EU member states also ready to seize this opportunity? I think it's very important to have both discussions in this day and age, with the challenges that we're all facing as a European continent. But I digress. Let me start with my first point and take it back. I think the enlargement policy is one of the most successful ones that the European Union has had. And I think what enlargement gave to Europe was peace, stability, unity, prosperity. And what challenges are we facing now? I guess maybe some of you would agree that we're facing the lack of some of these objectives. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind when we're discussing enlargement as well. For Albania, it's clear cut. I think it's very easy because it's been our lifelong dream and vocation to be members of the European Union. We've felt that ever since, even before democracy started, really, but especially in the 90s after and throughout the whole period of transition. And being a young person, I think it's even more easier because young people in Albania are really, really looking forward to being part of the European Union, are working hard towards being that a member of the European Union. So I think it's very, very easy for me to be here and discuss in this and join you in these terms of unity when it comes to EU. We have also, as the Madam President mentioned, it's true. It's not just about the end goal. I think it's at the same time, it's also about the journey. And you're right, as it was for Croatia, I think it's also for Albania. It's about the journey for us in making resilient institutions, in making robust institutions, in harmonizing the acquis, but not just that. I think it's about the journey when it comes to the culture, the mentality of the perception of being European members and European citizens. I think things evolve, but we definitely need to keep our sight back at where we started. We're very loyal to the EU idea. And enlargement fatigue is actually, unfortunately, not just an EU concept, but it's also something that we struggle with in the region. Public support is shrinking, as was mentioned by the RCC in their Balkan Barometer of 2024, if I'm not mistaken. And that's very dangerous. And that's very dangerous for not just our region, but I think for beyond just our region. For Albania, it's been a way that we fight this. Obviously, it's anchoring in our Euro-Atlantic values. And strategic communication is key. Strategic communication, I think, for both us and the EU member states. Education is also linked to this. Education for the younger generation. In Tirana now we have the Tirana campus of the College of Europe, which is definitely a step forward in this regard. And I would just like to conclude by saying that EU, it was mentioned in the first session actually, that EU is about diversity and bringing all the pieces to the puzzles. And I think we have a lot to say in this regard. And I think we have a lot to add to bring to the table. And because Jacques Delors, well, of course, rightly so, was mentioned in a lot of the seminars and sessions today, but also last night, I would also like to conclude with one of his quotes, which is, and I quote, "It is for us to put some flesh on the community's bones and give it a little more soul." And I think with the Western Balkans, and I hope many of you agree, we do give it some more soul to the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I invite you to make short remarks now because we only have less than 10 minutes before closing this session. Ambassador Turevsky, then I'll invite Mr. Corbett, Madam Margarita Marquez, and I think we'll have to give the floor back to the panel to close.
Thank you very much. I will try to be as short as possible. As was mentioned before, we are living in different geopolitical situation today than it was, let's say, 30 years ago when most of our countries proclaim independence from those from former Yugoslavia. And the power vacuum is not helpful. So we need to bring the region, as my dear friend Ambassador Katarovic, former president of Croatia, mentioned, we are Southeastern Europe. We believe that we belong in EU family. The process of enlargement has dragged for quite long for us. You know, we spoke about generations. I will tell you about my experience. I was a young diplomat when my country proclaimed independence. I thought by mid-career, my country will be EU and NATO member state. Then the time was dragging. I said, okay, towards the end of my career, my country will become EU or member state. Then I changed, okay, hopefully in my working career, I retired formally from the last year. And now my question is my country going to be a member of the European Union by end of my life? Because the life expectancy for male in my country is 74, and it will be 2033. So that the perspective of life of a person to give you how important it is to speed up that process. You have mentioned about gradual integration and growth plan. I would like to give a few remarks.
Please be quick.
Yeah, very. It's very important that the new growth plan is in place. There are two pillars. The first two pillars, one is giving the segments of the single market for the countries to exceed, and the second one is the regional common market. I believe it's important to join both of them and not to be just acceding to the segments of single market, but to full accession to a single market, and that process will mutually enforced. And one point, I recently, 2 years ago, I published a book, Economic Policies of the European Union, and what I found, because people speak about acquis, but in that acquis is a result of the economy, of the policies. And many people were private businesses and chambers of commerce. I had the feeling that they need to know more about the future economic policies of the European Union. So I believe that, and it will not cost, we are not part of the decision-making process in this moment, but whenever EU is starting to prepare new legislation, which will affect the private businesses, to consult the governments, but also the private sector, and that will, what my dear friend Colinda mentioned, help to inclusiveness process people in private businesses and people who feel that they are part of European Union is coming closer to Europe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Corbett, in less than a minute.
Thank you. I'm the former Labour Party leader in the European Parliament, but I'm also a writer and commentator on EU affairs. So I can reassure you, don't worry, I'm not going to ask a question about fast-track accession procedures for countries that have left the European Union and decide they want to come back. I'm going to ask a different question, which is coming back to the reform of the EU to prepare for a union of more than 30 member states. The key issue is its capacity to act, to continue to take decisions when it is larger, especially those fields that still require unanimity. There's been a debate, should this be done before accession or not at all? But there is a third way. An accession treaty can amend the existing treaties. It can be done simultaneously without needing to delay the accession process. If you build the necessary treaty amendments into the accession treaty, it can be done in one go. And that might also facilitate some of the political bargainings and pressures and trade-offs necessary for that to happen.
Thank you, Richard. Margareta, in less than a minute as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I try to speak on less than a minute, than 1 minute, but I'd like to do 2 comments on what Arantxa said. Because, of course, I'm the former rapporteur on the negotiation of the multi-annual financial framework. It's why I need to react what you said to confirm and to support your approach. Because clearly it's impossible to live with 35 member states with the same budgetary architecture that we have nowadays with 27. And this must be a clear political message when the Commission will put on the table next June the new report. I had a second point, but I stopped.
Thank you so much. And the last one in less than 30 seconds.
Oh, God. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm Besa. I'm a journalist from Kosovo. Very, very quickly. If the EU is going to have to take all the time that it needs to take to decide whether it wants to integrate or not the region, I think the EU has to be honest with the region and come clear and say, Yes, you have a future in the EU, or no, you don't have a future in the EU, because otherwise the damage that the EU is doing to the Western Balkans society, I think we're going to pay the consequences for the very, very long term. A lot of merit-based discussion was brought up earlier, yes, but the EU also has a huge power in political conditionality, and it uses that power. So when we discuss the extent to which the EU, how it is integrating or working with the region, I think we have to scrutinize way more the political level of the EU, and when it chooses to use its political power and political bargaining, and how it applies that. Because just take the case of North Macedonia. The country was asked to change the name, nothing happened out of it. Nothing happened out of it. There's consequences to that. Of course, then there's going to be a rise of nationalism, of sentiments of the kind. So I really think that for the Western Balkans, for the societies, is this happening or it's not happening? Because otherwise, it's limiting any other kind of political imaginary or thinking or possibilities for citizens.
And by that, you mean a precise timeline, like a commitment by a certain date?
Potentially, because yes, the growth plan, but we've been through this. The Berlin process was supposed to be the process that was going to bring the region closer to the EU. Now we have another one. In 2 years, there's going to be another one. So,
okay, thank you. I will give the floor back to the panel. I'll give you less than a minute each to pick up whatever you want to react on, and maybe starting with you Arantxa, in reverse order.
No, I think I would rather leave my colleagues to make comments, since they are, at the end of the day, the biggest actors in this exercise.
Okay, well, because my colleague from Kosovo mentioned, and this is the only why I'm thinking that we should enter together. The first thing is that in the past period we were leader with reforms and all the things, and we were prepared for entering the European Union. After that, we became in the middle, let's say, or maybe the worst in the last 7 years. And okay, if we take into consideration that it is the only merit-based, I'm asking myself how we will calculate our issue with Bulgaria. This is very serious, and because of that, I mentioned we need to enter all of us together, because once we had a problem with the name, now we have the problem with the Bulgarian. We are changing a lot of things. At the end, nothing is happening. This is creating frustration in our country among the people. And as I mentioned, we need to be part of this family. It is not a question that our people will leave the country and will go in European Union. At this moment, people are going out of the country with regular documentation without any problem. So we don't need European Union in order people to transfer to live in Germany or doesn't matter where, in EU. We need to be part of this family, because we believe that together we are stronger. As Colinda mentioned, a lot of things are positive when we are together, without visa, with one currency, a lot of benefits we will have, and especially in the economy sense.
Thank you. Tanya Miskiewicz.
Well, it's something that I have to use as a parallel. So we have to shout, to overshout the outside voices. This is what I would say will be something like a conclusion. But let me really be serious in concluding things. Look, the enlargement is always geopolitically driven. There are no enlargements which were not driven by geopolitics. This is the researcher speaking, not the minister, of course. There are different solutions. There are only 2 countries, member states, entering EU by themselves, Greece, Croatia. Usually, it's a group of states, bigger or smaller group of states. But this is all less important than the fact that we should all realize that this enlargement is the completion of Europe. And this is the biggest difference this time. Thank you.
Thank you. President Gravak-Tarović.
Yes, thank you. Two quick points. To your question, I am absolutely against a two-tier European Union or second-rate citizens or countries. However, we have to be realistic. If we want to create support for enlargement within the existing EU member states, there will have to be some changes made to the voting procedures, especially for issues that are not of crucial importance for every single country. And that, yes, can be part of a future accession treaty, or it can be agreed upon before that. The second point I want to make is the overall conclusion about enlargement. It has to continue. It's about completing Europe, as we have said today. It's about building Europe as a global player, because it's a strong, positive process that contributes to the growth and strength of the European Union. And when talking about the neighborhood of the Western Balkans, yes, I can testify to the fact that support for EU accession has been dropping, because the countries, the people perceive that no matter whatever we do, we're not good enough. And that vacuum is being filled by third forces, not just Russia, but that's an entirely different discussion of the geopolitical significance of the Western Balkans. But the third forces that are not necessarily beneficial to the region, that are confusing people or even turning them against EU enlargement and EU accession. And just imagine another conflict in the heart of Europe in between Croatia and Greece. Thank you.